The first unit we're starting with this semester is a unit on graphs. So we want to look at how to make graphs as well as how to read them and get information from them. So let's go through this getting started page here. So question number 1 says, what do you think this bar graph might be about on the side? So you could come up with any type of situation that would fit this graph that would have something to do with number of people as well as something to do with the months. So an example of this could be the number of guests at a banquet hall in the first half of the year. Because if you notice, the months only go up until June. So now in part B, they want us to label the vertical axis and put a title for the topic we named in part A. So the title here, we would just put at the very top, we would put guests at a banquet hall. And to label the vertical axis, so vertical, that means a line that goes up and down. So this one over here would be the vertical axis. And what do we have represented on that axis? Well, we have months. So I'm just going to label the vertical axis with months. So in part C, they're asking about how many more people were there in April than in the 2 months before and the 2 months after. So first, let's just look at how many people were there in April. So if we follow our graph and we read this, April had 600 people. So now let's look at the 2 months before April. If we look at February, February had 450 people. And March, if we follow that all the way down, that brings us to 100. So if we add those two amounts together, 450 plus 100, that would mean there was 550 guests there in the 2 months before. So how many more people were there in April than in March and February? Well, 550 to 600, that would make a 50-person difference. So about 50 people was the difference. Now let's also look at the 2 months after. So let's start off with May. How many people were there in May? Well, if we follow this line all the way down here, it leads us to 200. And in June, follow that all the way down here, that brings us to 350. So let's add these two amounts together. 200 plus 350 brings us to 550 once again. So again, there is a 50-person difference. There was about 50 more people there in April than in the 2 months before and the 2 months after. So in example 2 here, Rob surveyed grade 11 students. He asked about their favorite type of movie and recorded their results on the chart on the left. So here's that chart on the left. We need to create a bar graph for this data. But first we need to put some categories along the horizontal axis. So remember, horizontal, that's like the word horizon. Horizon is where the sun comes up and goes down. So the horizontal axis would go from left to right, or in other words, it would be the one down here. So we need to put some categories on this axis. Well, the categories we have are the types of movies. So let's just put these in here. We got romance, we got comedy, we have action, and we have drama. Now our next step is to put some numbers along the side where it says number of students. So we need to determine how much to jump up by on each of these little ticks here, because we need to be able to fit all of our data onto the graph. Now we're always going to start at 0 down here, so let's just put a 0 here to start, but what are we going to count up by? And it has to be the same interval every time. So we need at least 24 on the graph. So I think counting up by tens would be able to fit all of our data on here. So I'm going to do 0, 10, 20, and 30. And now let's plot our data onto the graph. So romance, 9 students liked romance. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a nice bar graph. So this will go up to approximately 9 there, and I'll color that in a little bit. Comedy is 21, so we're going to go all the way up to 20 and then slightly over it to get that 21. And I'll color that in. Action is 24, so this is going to go all the way up here, just below 25 there. And we'll color that in. And finally, drama is 6, so we'll go just above the little 5 mark. So there's our bar graph for the data on the left. Now in part B, Rob decided to rent a movie to watch with some friends from school. What type of movie would you suggest? Justify your decision. So looking at our chart here, we would probably suggest the most popular type of movie. So if we're looking, I would say action is the most popular type because it has the most people voting for it. But comedy also has a lot of votes as well. So, for example, you could say an action movie with some funny parts, because then it would fulfill both the action and the comedy and please a lot of people. In question number 3 here, we want to draw a horizontal number line from 0 to 100. We need to label the scale by 20s and then plot 27, 51, and 90. So our number line here, it's going to start at 0 and it's going to go all the way up to 100. Now we need to put the scale on here going up by 20s. So all that means is we're going to count up by 20s. So we're going to do 20, 40, 60, 80, and then that 100 is there. So now let's plot these points on the line. 27, well, that's just below 30, and 30 would be right in the middle here. So I'd say 27 would go approximately here. 51 would be just above 50, so if 50 is in the middle approximately here, 51 would be just beside it. And finally, 90 would be right in the middle of 80 and 100. In example number 4, all they want us to do is calculate each percent of 360. So this is a little bit of review from grade 10 essentials. To calculate a percent of a number, you would change the percent to a decimal point. So in this case, 15% would be 0.15. We would then take that decimal and multiply it by 360. So in your calculator, if you do 0.15 times 360, you will get 54. So 54 degrees would be 15% of 360 degrees. Again, 5% of 360. We're going to do the same thing. Let's convert this to a decimal. So we get 0.05, and we're going to times that by 360. So if you do that in your calculator, you will get 18 degrees. So 18 degrees is 5% of 360 degrees. Now moving on to example 5 here. John works at a camp in Canmore. He used this line graph to schedule events for tomorrow. It was 16 degrees at 9 p.m. Plot this on the graph. So at 9 p.m. would be this little mark over here, and it was 16 degrees. So 16 is over here, so let's follow this line over and match it up with our 9 p.m. And then we're going to attach these two dots. Now in part B, it says, in which hour was the temperature the warmest for swimming? So the warmest temperatures would be the ones the highest on the graph. So the two times that are the highest on here look to be these two. And if we follow that down to the times, that would be from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. In part C, it says, when did the temperature decrease? So if the temperature is falling, our graph will also be falling or decreasing. So it starts to decrease starting at this point, and then it goes all the way down from here. So I would say it decreases from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. Now it's asking what points did it increase. So we have a little bit of an increase right here, as well as another one right here. This middle part here stays the same. It doesn't increase or decrease, so we're not going to include that. So if we're looking at this first little section here, that increases from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then if we look at the second part over here, that's increasing from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And now the final thing is, when does the temperature not change? So there's a little section here that doesn't change, and then there's the other one right up here. So it doesn't change from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., and then again from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Now we're looking at circle graphs. So question 6 is asking, what is the measure of the angle in the circle graph? So it's asking for what this angle would be. And then we need to complete the legend to tell us what each sector might represent. So an entire circle is 360 degrees. Now to find that missing degree in section number A, we need to subtract all the other degrees from 360. So we're going to do 360 minus 54 minus 108 minus 36. So if you plug that in your calculator, you will get 162 degrees. So that's what's missing here is 162 degrees. And now if you add up 162 plus 36 plus 108 plus 54, it'll equal 360 degrees. And now we need to come up with a legend for this graph. Now this graph is types of coins in my wallet. So really we just have to pick a bunch of different types of coins to represent each letter. So for A, I'm going to say that that is quarters. For B, we'll say it's nickels. For C, we'll say it's loonies. And D, we'll say it's dimes. So we're just coming up with a legend here. And a legend is an explanation of the symbols or colors in a graph. In this case, we can't see any colors, so it's shades, the shades of a graph. And number 7 over here, I'm actually going to skip it. We're not going to do this one. So this entire section here is just an introduction to the graphing unit. It kind of introduced us to all the different types of graphs we're going to be looking at, which are bar graphs, line graphs, and circle graphs. We're also going to be looking at a couple others in there as well.